Hello everyone and welcome to the second round of the American Monoposto Championship. I'm your host Josh Kassar and today we'll take a look at what happened when the AMC visited the Emerson Fittipaldi Speedway in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's have a quick look at some rumours and some news surrounding the AMC right now. And first things first, I'd like to apologise for any names that I pronounce poorly. Please don't shout at me in the comments. Two new teams have entered the American Monoposto Championship ahead of the race in Rio. Aaron Curtis is going to debut the number 46 for the Turismo Autosport team, representing Ireland in this year's championship.
I really just chose number 46 as that's the number I usually race with and I like it a lot, I guess, so I just went with it. I think I've been sim racing since around mid-2019. Got a wheel in like around 2020 to 2021. I've been using the wheel ever since. Honestly, my expectations are just to be around the mid-pack and hope to stay there, especially in the road courses.
Also, Christian Dittmer is going to be joined by Stefan Cerner in the DMS Falcon sim racing team.
I'm doing sim racing now for about 12 years, I think, and it all started in Air Factor. Our main goal is to just, having fun, being competitive, basically scoring some solid points, have solid races without any big mistakes, and yeah, that's basically it. Just have fun and be competitive.
This race also marks the AMC debut for SCMM, the Italian squad led by Gino Gaggiano and Dominic Rustermeyer. Finally, Adrian Friedrich will compete in Rio as part of his 4-race oval schedule this year. Let's see how competitive the German is actually going to be once the green flag drops. After trying to finish the race in Long Beach on 3 wheels, Bartosz Kopeta has been given a 3-place grid penalty for the second race of the season. Let's hope this is the last time we see such a bizarre incident. Once again, Mark Kaya is going to replace Gwendolyn Cole at Super Gazelle Racing. After the Swedes' first outing for the team can be described as somewhat erratic, team boss Josh Kassar might be looking at other reserve options for the rest of the season. Currently, Kevin Peters is the odds-on favourite to win this year's Drivers' Championship. Our own Simon Core talked to Peters and tried to get to know the man behind the status a little better.
Kevin Peters trying to get ahead of Josh Kassar, not knowing how much fuel he has in his car. Look at that dive bomb, and he's in the lead. What a brilliant overtake from Kevin Peters.
Ich bin in einem Sim-Racing seit 2016 aktiv in anderen Ligen und habe vorher mit Formel 1 Spielen an der Xbox angefangen. Ich habe mir verschiedene Teams angeschaut und habe dann meine Person das Beste rausgesucht, was mir am besten gefallen hat und hoffe, dass das eine gute Entscheidung war. Ja, auf jeden Fall. Also ich habe das 2020 selbst gemerkt, Anfang der Saison bis circa Mitte, dass es was ganz anderes ist, wenn man zum ersten Mal da vorne mitfährt um einen Titel, bis man dann den ersten Sieg holt, die erste Pole und ein paar Podien, bis man da die Lockerheit drin hat. Und ich denke, da sind noch einige Fahrer hier dabei, die da noch relativ unerfahren sind und da sehe ich schon einen Vorteil. Ja, da gibt es verschiedene Piloten. Also momentan in der Formel 1 ganz klar Max Verstappen, schon seit ein paar Jahren. Früher war das mal Fernando Alonso und das ganz große Vorbild Alain Prost aus der alten Zeit. Ich versuche auch da den Stil etwas zu übernehmen, in der Setup-Arbeit und mit den Reifen umzugehen. Ja.
And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
Nee, auf keinen Fall. Also ich finde das relativ viel Schwachsinn. Geht dann eher den Weg von Alain. Ja, da gibt's genau ein Rennen und zwar das Le Mans-Rennen. Also das Indy habe ich ja bereits schon gewonnen, die Weltmeisterschaft auch in der VFC. Und ja, da fehlt halt noch Le Mans für die Triple Crown. Ich würde sagen, das war sogar das Wochenende am Norrisring. Damals mit ich glaube, das war noch eine kleinere Klasse, Formelwagen. Mit den 2 Rennen einmal den 2. Platz und dann im 1. und einem netten Fight mit Cativo. Ja, woher auch der Spitzname Norris King kam.
The Emerson Fittipaldi Speedway is a 3-kilometre oval track built at the site of an old Grand Prix circuit. It might just be the only oval circuit in the world without any banking whatsoever, making it an oddity even in American open wheel racing. After testing, it seems as if traction might be the key to winning this race more so than drafting. Considering that driver aids such as traction control are allowed in this year's championship, many front runners are expected to use at least a low traction control setting. Seeing as the safety car speed has been reduced since the first race of the season, multiple safety cars and therefore multiple pit stops are also expected here. The Norris King also strikes on ovals. Kevin Peters is once again in pole position. Knežević performs well once again in P2 ahead of Dominic Rustemeyer and Gonzalez Cativo, who make up the second row. Both have got to be very happy with their results. Gino Gaggiano and Jan Winter line up in row 3. Behind them, Max Heyman, Robin Eder and Christian Dittmer and a disappointed Josh Cassar. Philip Feckel is the worst of the 4 Costech drivers in P11. Aaron Curtis debuts in a respectable P12. Friedrich manages a midfield starting position for his first race in P13 ahead of 2 Streamline boys, Oboyski and Hamilton. Corpetta lines up in 16th with his 3-place grid penalty ahead of Kamil Jamborski, who qualified 17th but was kicked from the server before the race had even began. Behind him, Simon Kaur in P18, Mark Kyer in P19 and joining during the warm-up Dominic Kronsky in 20th position. And with that, I'll hand you over to your commentator, Simon Kaur.
Thank you, Josh. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rio de Janeiro. Let's have a look at what happened during the formation lap when Adrian Friedrich decided to, let's just say, adjust his aerodynamics for the rest of the race. Losing his front wing and his nose cone. Now, he was not given a penalty for continuing with this interesting interpretation of aerodynamic efficiency after this collision, seeing as he didn't get into the pits immediately. However, he was given a warning by the race stewards after the fact, seeing as this obviously endangered other drivers with both his front wing being thrown into the rest of the grid, as well as him maybe not being able to control his car as well as he was supposed to with a fully functioning car. Now, lap 1 of the race, Alexander Knežević versus Kevin Peters for the lead of the race, seeing as both of them start at the front of the grid. And it looks as if Kevin Peters once again has an abysmal start to his race, just like in Long Beach. And it also looks as if Gonzalez Cativo and Alexander Knežević are now fighting for the lead. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that's Dominic Rustemeyer having an engine failure at the back, but it certainly looks as if Gonzalez Cativo is now in the lead for Costech ahead of Knežević, Winter, and Gino Gaggiano. Kevin Peters once again in the midfield, just like in Long Beach, while you can still see Adrian Friedrich running around without a front wing. Now let's look at the start from Gonzalez Cativo's perspective, overtaking Kevin Peters as well as Alexander Knežević on the back straight, and he is now in the lead. Looking at Kevin Peters' perspective now, it's difficult to tell as to why he had such a terrible start once again. I mean, in Long Beach, he did accidentally hit his pit limiter, though I highly doubt that he would repeat such a mistake. Looking at Dominic Rustemeyer's perspective, it's difficult to tell when the engine actually quits, but it is for certain that his engine just decided to quit, and therefore his race is pretty much over at this point. You can see him spinning right here as a result of the engine failure. Looking at it from a different angle, you can see that Kevin Peters was rather close to his rear wing, but he never actually hit the SCMM driver. Speaking of people spinning out, you can see Philip Fickler almost taking out Dominic Kronsky in this bizarre situation, but both of them are still able to continue the race. Speaking of people who are able to continue the race, Adrian Friedrich finally decides to actually do a pit stop for his broken car. Lap 2, Max Heyman fighting with Alexander Knežević, intense battle for P2. Now look at Robin Ide, Josh Cassar, Kevin Peters, and Aaron Curtis trying to get a piece of the action. Cassar says thank you very much, overtaking the Bosnian veteran. Behind them, Curtis, Peters, and Bartosz Korpeta. Now Robin Ide trying to overtake his teammate. And Ide succeeds. The man who was surprisingly able to finish in P2 in Long Beach is now once again in P2. Cassar with a bump and run. Now in P3 behind The German with the number 44, Kazar now trying to get around the outside of Ide. There's a little bump in the back and Ide outbrakes himself. Collects Peters. We see 2 cars spinning, Kazar and Ide. And Ide collects 2 other cars, Christian Dittmer and Aaron Curtis. And that might be the end for all 3 of them in this race. Let's have a look at the situation one more time. It looks as if Jan Winter hit the back of Max Heyman's car. Might have been a blessing in disguise, though, because he was able to avoid all of this calamity. Look at the front and rear wings flying. Aaron Curtis losing a rear wing. Christian Dittmer losing a front wing. And Robin Ide losing his entire nose cone as well. I'll look at it from Aaron Curtis' perspective. In their debut for Turismo Autosport, not being able to avoid Robin Ide. And therefore, we can already tell you not being able to continue in their debut in the American Monoposto Championship. Christian Dittmer also trying to avoid the situation. Doesn't work either. And he's also going to have to retire. We can already tell you that much. And it looks as if he also got a hit in the back from Mark Heyer. And let's look at what happened with Josh Kazar, because he spun as well. He was able to catch it, but he hit the barrier. Now look at Kevin Peters. He was actually quite fortunate not to lose his front wing in this collision. He's still able to continue and potentially fight for a race victory. Still no safety car deployed. People were a bit confused by that, a bit miffed by that, seeing as that obviously influenced the strategy and such, which also meant that there were collisions like these between Mark Heyer, Dominik Kronsky, and Bartosz Kopeta. All 3 are still able to continue, but it doesn't change the fact that there should be a safety car on track right now, but there isn't, so Gino Gaggiano and Alexander Knežević are still fighting for second position. Now, of course, this is going to be crucial for this race in terms of strategy, seeing as it seems as if there's just going to be no safety cars today. We're not sure as to why that is the case, but nonetheless, teams and drivers will have to adapt and adjust accordingly. Now look at Adrian Friedrich being lapped by both Gino Gaggiano and Alexander Knežević. Meanwhile, Gonzalez Cativo is having the time of his life in the lead. The man who returned to sim racing with the Kostec team at the number 69, the 2013 Formula World Championship champion, ahead of Knežević, Gaggiano, Heyman, Peters, and Winter in the top 6, Kopeta and Kronsky in the points as well. Those could be big points for Schleppak today, and Adrian Friedrich certainly isn't having the time of his life spinning at the final turn. But let's just say he's not going to be the only driver in this race to make that mistake. For example, if you look at Philip Fickler and Josh Kazar, they both make the same mistake just a tad bit later, and it looks as if Josh Kazar might actually have to retire because of it. Let's look at the situation from Josh Kazar's perspective, being in traffic, multiple cars around him. Maybe gets on the throttle a bit too early, hits the barrier, glitches into it, and that spells the end to his race. Certainly a disappointing weekend for the Super Gazelle Racing team boss. Now, he wasn't particularly happy with his quali pace, and he certainly isn't going to be happy with having to retire after only a few laps. Philip Fickler, on the other hand, was able to continue. Now, yours truly decided to join the fun as well. Now, that might be because some people aren't that well equipped to handle situations such as the safety car not being deployed when it really should be, but nonetheless, definitely not a performance to be proud of for the streamlined driver. Meanwhile, Alexander Knežević and Gino Gaggiano are still fighting for second place. You can see Gonzalez Cativo still ahead of both of them. Now, I'm not sure whether or not fighting with each other actually benefits either one of them, seeing as they might want to catch Gonzalez Cativo to actually be able to overtake him, but at the same time, we're not sure how much fuel either one of these guys have on board, and also, I'm not particularly sure whether or not they might not actually be able to catch him despite fighting each other, seeing as they tend to continuously swap positions as we can see here. Therefore, they might actually be able to pace themselves in a way where they are able to fight each other without losing too much time. Surprisingly, there are two Streamline boys in the points right now, Matthew Oboyski and Lucas Hamilton, but it doesn't seem to last for too long, seeing as Hamilton bumps into the wall, Oboyski spins, and they collide with each other, therefore effectively ending both of their races at this point. Now, team principal James Early surely isn't going to be happy with this type of result. Now, the question remains if Simon Core can actually score some points for the team like he did in Long Beach, or if he's also going to fail to see the checkered flag as well. In any case, Streamline cannot be happy with their 2022 campaign so far. However, somebody who is probably quite happy with his return to sim racing and therefore his 2022 season campaign so far is Gonzalez Cativo racing for Costag. Coming into the pits right now, behind him Gino Gaggiano and Alexander Knizovic, trading places like insert a good comparison here. And now the question is, how many times does Gonzalez Cativo actually have to pit, and will he be able to compete with both Gino Gaggiano and Alexander Knizovic after the pit stops in terms of strategy and pace? Now we can see that Knizovic and Gaggiano are still fighting with each other. Gaggiano trying to get ahead of Alexander Knizovic, the Bosnian veteran who scored a podium on his very first outing for the American Monoposto Championship in Long Beach. But then again, Gino Gaggiano with a brilliant debut so far, put no foot wrong, made no mistakes, kept his nose clean, and is now in a position where he might actually be able to overtake Alexander Knizovic once again. Doesn't go for the dive bomb, waits for the second turn possibly. Now 10 minutes have gone by and we've already seen a lot of kerfuffle, action, controversy, and a few interesting tidbits in regards to the rest of the season, but it seems as if the controversy is going to continue, seeing as Gino Gaggiano bumps into the back of Alexander Knizovic, potentially costing him a race victory at this point. Knizovic following in the footsteps of Adrian Friedrich, though under different circumstances than the German's original interpretation of aerodynamic efficiency. While it seems as if Simon Cora might have actually confused both Knizovic and Gaggiano by bizarrely blocking them, there will be no penalties for anybody involved in this instance. However, Simon Cora is certainly going to feel a bit of guilt after the race, seeing as he is the one who effectively caused the situation to occur. Meanwhile, Kevin Peters is now in the lead ahead of Jan Winter, Dominik Kronski, Bartosz Karpeta, Mark Kyer, Philip Fikela, Gonzalez Cativo Cora, and Gino Gaggiano only in P9, Knizovic only in P10 because of the situation. Meanwhile, Dominik Kronski almost repeats the mistake that Fikela and Kazar made, but his race is looking pretty good so far. He's in P3. He's obviously going to lose a few spots after coming into the pits, but it does look pretty good for the lead Schleppheck driver at the moment, seeing as his engine hasn't blown up at least, and that's certainly an improvement compared to Long Beach, I think. Mark Kaya also does his first pit stop, though he's not in as good of a position as Dominik Kronski, though he's the only Super Gazelle driver remaining in the race. Now, is it just me, or is somebody potentially getting nervous over here over the prospect of potentially being able to win their first race in quite a few years? Gonzalez Cativo bumping into the barrier, still being able to continue, but I'm sure his car ain't gonna like that. Meanwhile, Jan Winter is now in the pits. He's in P2. He's having a pretty good race at the moment. Again, the man who almost never practiced ahead of the first race of the season. Definitely practiced more for the second race of the season, which is cool to see. But he's not the only one in the pits. 40 minutes to go, and Kevin Peters also decides to head into the pits. Both of them pitting significantly later than Gonzalez Cativo. One has to wonder why that is. We hear that possibly Mr. Cativo cannot change the settings on his wheel and is therefore not able to adjust to the lack of safety cars in this race in terms of strategy. Also, yours truly has managed to blow up his engine and therefore end his afternoon rather early, which is what you can see right here on screen. Lap 32, time for another bizarre collision, this time between Max Heyman and Kevin Peters, while Peters was trying to lap Max Heyman, who's had quite an anonymous afternoon so far. And now look at this bizarre bumping into each other. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but what I am sure of is that both of them need to get their cars repaired ASAP, which means that Jan Winter is now in the lead of this race and might just be on for his very first victory in the American Monoposto Championship if he keeps his cool and keeps his car on track. Well, speaking of keeping it on track, Mr. Philip Fikela doesn't keep it on track, bumps into the wall, does the famous Adrian Friedrich Alexander Knizovic strategy of trying to adjust your aerodynamics while you're racing, though I'm not sure whether or not he intended for it to go this way, but nonetheless, he keeps on going since there are still points to be had for the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. That is also why Alexander Knizovic, despite his car being quite crooked at this point, still keeps on going, even though he's already being lapped by Gino Gaggiano, the man who actually bumped into the rear of his car. Certainly a courageous effort by the number 7, but I'm not sure whether or not this is actually going to pay off in the end, since I'm not sure if he can keep his car on track with it being crooked like this. 35 minutes to go. Bartosz Karpeta has had a great afternoon so far, almost puts it into the barrier, loses 5th position to Kevin Peters, but he keeps it out of the barrier, something that neither Josh Kazar nor Gonzalez Cativo managed to accomplish, so Good job, Bartosz. Especially considering his 3-place grip penalty, he's had quite a good afternoon, just like Jan Winter in first place. Kronsky's back in the top 5. Markaya's in P7, though he's a lap back, which is why you can see the asterisk next to his name. And it now seems as if this race has become less about strategy and more about getting to the end in one piece. That's definitely going to be the goal for Dominik Kronsky, who's in P4 right now, coming in for what I suppose would be his final pit stop. However, 1 lap later, he has to get into the pits one more time. Now, I'm not sure whether or not that's because of a drive-through penalty or because of a cock-up at the pit stop. However, it turns out that during this pseudo pit stop drive-through penalty thing, his engine blows up and therefore he's out of this race. So no points finish for Dominik Kronsky despite performing incredibly well today. Another big disappointment for the lead Schleppek driver. His second retirement in a row for the second time in a row because of his engine. And now it is up to the Schleppek crew to actually find out what in God's name is going on with their engine, seeing as they've now lost 2 potential top 5 finishes because of their engines just blowing up suddenly. Now, speaking of things blowing up, it seems as if Gino Gaggiano now has to deal with a puncture. Not only has he collided with Knežević today, which certainly must have caused damage to his car, but now he's also confronted with having to pit one more time because of the puncture. Now, this has been quite a confusing race in regards to strategy because of the lack of safety cars and because of the fact that people like Peters, Gaggiano, and Heyman had to pit more than they probably expected because of damage to their cars, and combined with the fact that half the field had to retire after only a few laps, the current results are certainly not what people would have expected before the race. Meanwhile, Bartosz Kopeta and Gino Gaggiano are fighting for 4th position. Ahead of them, Kevin Peters in 2nd position. Now, I'm not sure whether or not Bartosz Kopeta is going to fight Gino Gaggiano too hardly, seeing as Bartosz Kopeta certainly has a point to prove on one hand, but on the other hand, he's the only Schleppek driver remaining, and therefore he needs to score points, and you could either interpret this as Kopeta outbraking himself or letting Gaggiano through. Either way, a pretty solid performance for the Schleppek driver, you have to say. 20 minutes to go and Jan Winter still in the lead. It looks pretty good for him at the moment. He's in a secure position. Peter's nowhere to be seen, nor is Kativo anywhere near him. Now, we're still not sure how many times people are going to pit at this point, whether or not people are going to be able to finish the race, whether or not people have to stop one more time. But it looks as if both Winter and Peters have to pit one more time. So Winter's still ahead of Peters. 15 minutes to go and Jan Winter spins. I cannot believe my eyes. Jan Winter repeats the mistake that Gonzalez Kativo, Bartosz Kopeta, and Josh Kazar made throughout the race. He hits the wall, not able to avoid the wall like Bartosz Kopeta. He has to limp back to the pits, his car crooked, his race almost certainly over when it comes to fighting for the victory, and it looks as if Kevin Peters is going to win his 2nd race in a row. Now, I wonder whether or not Jan Winter could have avoided such an instance if he had practiced more. Again, he practiced more for this race than he did for Long Beach, but still I wonder whether or not that might have played a part in this mistake. Gonzalez Kativo now ahead of Jan Winter. He had to pit one more time, but certainly not taking as much time in his pit stop, seeing as Jan Winter had to repair damage on his car. But that's not all bad news for Odilo Racing, because Jan Winter has received a drive-through penalty for speeding in the pit lane while his car got fixed. Now, despite the fact that his car isn't really fixed at this point, as you can tell by his crooked rear wing, that is certainly a big disappointment and a big punch in the gut for the Odilo Racing crew. It's also a big punch in the gut for Markayu, who has to retire after being lapped multiple times. Now, I'm not sure whether or not this performance is going to impress Josh Kazar enough for him to be allowed to sit in the Super Gazelle car one more time. We'll have to wait and see for Interlagos to see if these kind of performances are enough for him to quote-unquote keep a seat at Super Gazelle. And someone who was incredibly fortunate today is Kevin Peters. He crosses the finish line, 42 points in the championship for the MPM driver. Kevin Peters wins 2 in a row. He wins in Long Beach and he wins in Rio. He definitely benefited from other people's mistakes and misfortune, but that's not to discredit his performance today. Gonzalez Kativo finishes in 2nd place ahead of Gino Gaggiano, Jan Winter in P4, Bartosz Kopeta with a pretty good P5, especially considering his 3-place grip penalty, and we're about to look at the rest of the race results and at the current championship standings in just a second. Alexander Knežević finishes 6th ahead of Max Himmelmann. Not the greatest race for the man with the number 13 on his car. Philip Fickler in P8, Mark Kyer in P9, Dominic Kronsky finishes 10th ahead of Simon Kor and Matthew Oboyski. Now, Kyer, Kronsky, Kor, and Oboyski are going to get points. However, it's only going to be half points, seeing as they didn't complete 75% of the race distance. Now, a quick glance at the Drivers' Championship reveals that Kevin Peters is in a comfortable lead with 18 points ahead of Jan Winter and 20 points ahead of Alexander Knežević, the two Odilo Racing Team cars. Gonzalez Cotivo is in 4th position ahead of his Costech teammate Robin Ide. Gaggiano is in P6 ahead of Philip Fickler, Josh Kazar, Bartosz Capetta, and Simon Kor rounding out the top 10 in the Drivers' Championship. In the Teams Championship, MPM leads both Odilo and Costech with only a 2-point gap. Super Gazelle Racing in 4th position ahead of SCMM, the competitive Schlappack team, and Streamline Engineering with only 9.5 points. Next episode is going to be uploaded on May the 14th, and it's going to be about our 3rd race of the season at the Interlagos circuit in Sao Paulo. Until then, thank you for watching. I'm going to leave you with 2 of the 3 podium finishers from today, Kevin Peters and Gino Gaggiano. Wonder why you're not hearing anything from Gonzalez Cotivo? You're going to find out next week. Until then, goodbye. So, Herr Gaggiano, erstes Rennen in der Liga im 2. Saisonrennen und direkt ein unter Umständen chaotisches Podium. Wie siehst du die ganze Sache?
Ja, auf jeden Fall irgendwo auch sehr glücklich, also auch von der Strategie her. Das war natürlich nicht ganz einfach, erst mit den ganzen Ausfällen und auch das Risiko, was wir mit den Reifen eingegangen sind. Ich hatte ja auch, glaube ich, vor dem 2. oder 3. Stopp irgendwo einen Platten, was mich sehr viel Zeit gekostet hat. Also es hätte auch Platz 2 werden können, aber ich will nicht meckern.
Ich meine, du möchtest nicht meckern. Die Frage ist ja, gibt es für dich irgendeinen Grund zu meckern in puncto kein Safety Car an Stellen, wo es ein Safety Car hätte geben müssen? Hat euch das strategisch im Endeffekt geholfen oder hätte es euch eher geholfen, wenn es einen Restart oder 2 Safety Car Phasen gegeben hätte?
Ja, das ist, glaube ich, an für sich ein bisschen kompliziert zu beantworten. Ich glaube, es hätte im Endeffekt beides Vor- und Nachteile geben können, aber ich glaube, also ich bin davon überzeugt, dass es in dem Fall eher vorteilhaft war, dass es kein Safety Car gab. Aber für das gesamte Feld wäre es vielleicht von der Struktur her natürlich besser gewesen.
Jetzt hast du ja verdienterweise dann den 3. Platz auch erreicht in dem Rennen, aber wie ordnest du denn aktuell die Performance von SCMM ein, auch unter dem Umstand, dass ihr ja, wenn ich es richtig gehört habe, für das dritte Rennen in der Saison einen neuen Fahrer verpflichtet habt?
Ja, insgesamt würde ich schon sagen, dass wir da nicht unbedingt überrascht sind, weil wir kannten auch den einen oder anderen Fahrer, wussten also, wo wir uns einordnen können. Von Cativos Performance war ich persönlich überrascht. Und ansonsten hat sich das eigentlich von der Pace her so abgespielt, wie ich es erwartet habe. Hatte auch einen schönen Fight mit Knežević. Ja, und für das nächste Rennen haben wir natürlich noch den Peter Rühl verpflichtet, der dann natürlich auch seine ersten Schritte in der AMC wagen möchte. Und wir bieten natürlich den Platz dafür.
Ja, Kevin, du hast das 2. Rennen der Saison gewonnen. Erstmal herzlichen Glückwunsch. Bevor wir auf dein Rennen mittelfristig eingehen, wie hast du diese chaotischen ersten Runden erlebt und wie hast du den Umstand erlebt oder wie stehst du zu der Tatsache, dass es im gesamten Rennen kein Safety Car gab?
Ja, erstmal vielen Dank, Simon. Ja, der Start war ein absolutes Chaos. Der ist wie im ersten Rennen schon schiefgegangen bei mir. War dann in einer Position, wo vor meinem Auto sehr viele Unfälle passiert sind in den ersten Kurven. Hab Schaden genommen am Auto. Dann stand Rustermeier mit einem Motorschaden in der Kurve. Es gab halt kein Safety Car, was nach ein paar Runden dann klar war. Und ja, dann wusste ich halt schon oder kam der Gedanke, die Strategie umzubauen und halt das Ganze zu Ende zu fahren mit viel Sprit.
Jetzt ist es ja so, wir haben sehr viele Leute gesehen, die mit Schaden weitergefahren sind, die im späteren Rennverlauf noch Fehler gemacht haben. Wer war denn aus deiner Sicht für dich heute der gefährlichste Konkurrent um den Sieg?
Ja, das ist schwer zu sagen. Also anfangs war es Knežević und Gaggiano, aber die beiden haben sich ja abgeballert. Später wurde es dann Cativo und Winter. Nur die beiden hatten dann auch Probleme. Cativo mit seinen Pitstops. Winter hat dann selbst einen Fehler gemacht und ich war dann einfach nur der Profiteur. Also ich Ich hatte zur Rennmitte überhaupt keine Chance mehr, das Rennen zu gewinnen und wollte halt Schadensbegrenzung betreiben und vielleicht Platz 4, 5 mitnehmen.
Ich meine, du sprichst es an, Platz 4, Platz 5, Schadensbegrenzung, jetzt hast du die ersten 2 Rennen der Saison gewonnen. Bist du bereits in der Position, dass du sagst, du bist in einer sehr, 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 sehr guten Position für die Meisterschaft, oder würdest du den Ball zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt noch flach halten? Vor allem nach dem, was du jetzt fahrerisch in diesem Rennen erlebt hast.
Das ist schwer zu sagen auch wieder. Also der Abstand ist relativ groß zum zweiten Fahrer oder zu den Kostek-Jungs, aber ich würde sagen, es ist noch alles drin. Also es sind noch 8 Rennen zu fahren, viele Punkte zu holen, auch mit den Poles, und mir kann so ein Rennen auch passieren, dass ich den Reifen verliere oder ohne Punkte heimfahre, und dann ist alles wieder offen.
Meine abschließende Frage wäre, wie stehst du zu dem Umstand, dass heute keiner deiner Teamkollegen mit an Bord war? Denn abgesehen von dem Startchaos und dem nicht vorhandenen Safety Car nach den chaotischen Situationen ist ja das durchaus ein großer strategischer Nachteil gewesen und könnte ja weiterhin, sollte sich das durch den Rest der Saison ziehen, ein großes Problem für die Meisterschaft darstellen. Wenn ein Szenario, wie du es gerade geschildert hast, passieren würde mit vielleicht einem Rennen oder 2, die nicht so gut laufen. Ja,
das ist immer sehr schade, allein für ein Team zu fahren. Ich denke, in der Vorbereitung hat man gesehen, dass ich trotzdem klarkomme, alleine. Dann auf Pace bin. Was die Strategie angeht, wird es dann schwer bei Ovalrennen. Aber es hat jetzt funktioniert. Ich glaube, in der Meisterschaft sind wir auch als Team immer noch vorne. Und ich werde einfach versuchen, immer das Maximum rauszuholen und hoffe, dass wir die Meisterschaft auch gewinnen.